Hello everyone and welcome to the Commando Cast. This is episode 40, that's right, 4-0, for those of you guys giving me flack about the order 6-6 versus 66 thing, which is completely fair. I'm Andrew, and in today's episode we're talking probability and statistics in Star Wars Destiny, and I'm titling this one, Please Tell Me the Odds. Hey guys, thanks for joining me again. So right now, the day this is being published is the weekend of GenCon. So instead of wasting all of our time and your time talking about meta and everything that's going to be blown out of the water based on how everything comes out this weekend, instead what I wanted to do was kind of go back to the old Destiny School thing that I'd done way back, which was the card value episode. So user Curlo actually hit me up about a week and a half ago, and he said, and I'm showing it up right here, but he said, question for you, I'm a finance guy, good with numbers, cheers to finance guys, but dice odds sometimes drive me crazy. I love the video you posted about the weighted value of a resource, shield cards, etc., in other words, the value episode. So I thought you might be the right person to talk to about dice odds. Here's what I'm having trouble with, and I'll give a couple examples. Maul's power action on Maul's Saber, there's a 67% chance, 66.6, right, that I hit damage each time I roll it. How do I calculate the odds of hitting damage in one side on two rolls? Same scenario with Yoda 1, 33% chance to hit his special each roll. How do I calculate the odds of him hitting those specials when I roll him out? And how do I calculate the odds of him hitting one special on two rolls? So I missed a special on both dice on activation, discard reroll both dice. Trying to figure out before even activating what the odds are of hitting special in 2 attempts, right? I mean, this is not an uncommon scenario, right? We have dice in the pool, or you have someone you have to activate, you only have one card in your hand, and you want to figure out what it is, okay? So what I want to do is I want to do a quick refresher. The way we're going to approach this episode is I want to do a quick refresher on just how probability and statistics works, and then I'm going to attack it from 3 angles. 1, we're going to talk about dice roll probability. 2, we're going to talk about card draw probability. And then in the third, I want to give a very real life example. This actually happened in a game that I was doing that Amy was playing in, and I asked myself, I was like, what is the right play? So really what I want to talk about in that case is applied probability, right? Using what we learned to actually, or using what we're talking about to actually make a decision. Because knowing the theory and all that is great, but it doesn't actually matter unless we can do something with it, right? So we're going to take the first 2 sections to actually talk about something and learn something, and then we're going to do the third one to actually use it to our advantage, right? But first, as you guys know, I teach an engineering class to high school students, and instead of redoing the slides and images, because as you guys know, it actually takes me a significant amount of time to put in the images that we do on the screen, instead I'm just actually going to use the slides from that class. So thank you for sticking with me on that. So first, let's go into the probability refresher. Okay, so the probability of a single event, most of you guys who are playing this game, I mean, let's be honest, if you're someone who decides you want to play a game like Star Wars Destiny or Magic or anything like that, you're probably smart enough to be able to figure out like the basics of math, right? People who can't do math and can't operate themselves generally aren't the type of people playing these games. And there's also a money aspect to that as well, right? But let's not go into that, right? So the probability of a single event, the number of desired outcomes, divided by the number of possible equally likely outcomes is probability, right? And that is probably the main statement in all of probability when we talk about it is desired outcome, right? What do you want? And that kind of goes a little bit to talk about what Mike and I have gone into in various other things in the past of what is your success criteria, right? If you want to roll damage, if you want to roll damage that's not a pay side because you have no money, right, it can very much change the environment of what your success criteria is, okay? So in the very simple example that I'm showing here, right, if I was just using a normal 6-sided die, like normal 6-sided die that you would use in any other game that's not Destiny, right, the probability of rolling a 6 is 6 over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1 over 6. Probability of rolling a 1 or a 6 is 2 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It's a 1 and a 6 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, right, which is 2 over 6 or 1/3. Okay, continuing on probability, events A and B are independent. Now, in Destiny, when we're talking about events A and B, the best, simplest example might be 2 die rolls, right? What are the chances of rolling damage on a die if I roll it twice, meaning if I pitch to reroll the second time, or if I get some reroll for card effect or whatever, right? probability of A and B happening is multiplicative. Okay, so the probability of getting the success criteria in 2 rolls, for example, would be multiplying the probability of getting it in the first time times the probability of getting it in the second time. Okay, very simple. Okay, probability of A, and that's for and, to be clear. Probability of A or B starts to become a little more complicated, right? So in the case of A and B, that would be rolling damage twice. In the case of A or B, that would be rolling damage on one of those 2 rolls, meaning, because in Destiny, again, we would, of course, stop rolling once we would get damage, for example, right? So the probability of A or B happening becomes a little more complicated. It's P, probability of A or B, equals probability of A happening plus probability of A happening minus the combined of probability of A and B happening. So all of a sudden things start to get a little more complicated, and that's really where people who understand probability at a basic level start to fall apart, is because all of a sudden you have to like look at one group, look at another group, look where the 2 groups intersect, subtract it, and it becomes a lot uglier. Okay, so let's come back to that in just a second, right? So let's look at example 1, which is a very simple example. Okay, if we roll 2 dice, what are the probability that and by this I mean 2 dice at the same time. I mean, I guess you could roll the same die twice, either way, but what are the probability that both dice will roll a 1? Okay, it's 1 over 6 times 1 over 6, meaning it's 1 over 36, right? So very low chance that you're going to roll a 1, pick up that die again and roll a 1. Or in this case, roll the top side and pick up that die and roll the top side. Very low chance of that happening, and I think everyone understands that. However, if we look at example 2, if we roll 2 dice, what are the probability that either die will roll a 1? In this case, it's 1 over 6 plus 1 over 6 minus the combination of rolling a 1 on both dice, which is because, again, we've specified that we only want to roll it on 1. So you have to subtract the combination of if we rolled 1 on both, right? And that's where things, again, start to get a little hairy in terms of success criteria. But again, what we're really moving towards here, and the reason I'm specifying this, is because what we're really looking at is rerolls of the same die, right? So the probability that either one of those dice rolls a 1 is 11 over 36, okay? And that's either one, not that they both do, okay? Now, what's very important and what we're going to be using in most of our examples tonight is that the probability of success versus the probability of failure combined equals 1. Okay? It's very binary. You can either succeed in your task or fail in your task. And that's a good thing for us because that means that we can use 1 minus to our advantage. Okay? So if you actually look at the previous example, if what we instead did is calculated the probability of the dice not rolling a 1, what we get is 1 minus 5 over 6, because that's the chance of it not rolling a 1, times times 5 over 6, which is the probability of it not rolling a 1. 1 minus that, we get 11/36, right? It works out exactly the same. The answer is the same, and why that's important right here, right? Important concept is the probability of failure is 1 minus success, and the inverse of that is success is 1 minus failure. And the reason this is important for us is because it can make our calculations incredibly easy. Instead of having to worry about that formula where we look at success minus combinations, instead what we do is we just calculate calculate the probability of not getting what we wanted, and then subtract that from 1. And all of a sudden things can become significantly simpler. All right, so let's move into talking about what we just learned in terms of dice roll probability. Okay, so the first example he had asked me to look into was Maul Saber example, so let's go ahead and use that, right? The probability of rolling damage sides in 2 rolls of the Maul Saber is the probability of rolling damage equals 1 minus the probability of not rolling damage, okay? That's just what we talked about. In order to not roll damage, we would have to miss. We would have to roll 2 of the non-damage sides twice. So in that case, we have to do 2 over 6 times 2 over 6, because remember it's the and case there, right? The chance of rolling those 2 sides and the chance of rolling those 2 sides. So you multiply them together. you get that answer, you subtract it from 1, and what we end up finding is, just by doing that calculation, is that about 89% of the time, 88.9% of the time, with one reroll, you are going to hit a damage side. Now, it could be the 2, could be the 4, whatever, because we specified our success criteria merely as being damage. But you are going to hit a damage side 88.9% of the time on Mole Saber. If we then move to the Yoda example that he asked about, what is the probability of rolling a special on Elite Yoda on activation? Okay, so in this case, he has 2 dice, so we need to consider how both of those dice interact with each other. So our success criteria is rolling the special, which is a 1 out of 3 chance, or a 2 out of 6 chance, because of course there are 6 sides on the die. So probability of rolling a special is 1 minus the chance, or the probability of not rolling, right? Probability of that is thus 1 minus 4 over 6 times 4 over 6. We come down to 1 minus 0.444, and that means that we have a 55.6% chance of rolling a special on Yoda on his first activation. Okay, if we then go to the second part of his question, what if I have a reroll, right? What are the chance of failing, right? So that's really what we're going to do here, is what is the chance of failing to get a single Yoda special after activating him Elite and pitching to reroll? In that case, we can use what we already did in the previous calculation, right? It's that 4 over 6, right? That 4 over 6 is the probability of failure. So we get 4 over 6 times 4 over 6 times 4 over 6 times 4 over 6. Now you could also just square it, right, for you math guys, right? But what it boils down to is that with the reroll, you have an 80.2% chance, probability, a 0.082 probability of hitting at least one special on Yoda. All right, so we just got done looking at the basics of probability as applied to dice rolls. So now let's go ahead and look at our card draw probability. Let's start by doing this by looking at just our opening hand draw. So of course in this game we draw our 5. We can then select up to all of those to put back, shuffle them into our deck, and then of course do our mulligan, drawing another 5, right? So the easiest way to calculate this is, again, by using the backwards method, right? So the probability of having a specific card in our first draw with 2 copies in deck. So let's say we want to calculate the probability of having, let's say, an entourage in our hand and our opening 5 cards, right? So again, what we'll do is do it the backwards method. So the probability of not drawing an entourage in our opening 5 cards. Okay, so let's just break it down card by card. The first card we draw, there are 30 cards in our deck, 28 of which are not entourage. So there's a 28 over 30 probability of not drawing entourage. Card 2 will thus be 27 over 29, because there's only 29 cards in our deck, 27 of which are not entourage. Card 3, card 4, and card 5 continue to just go down the list in that fashion. And then what we want to do to calculate the probability of not getting it in our opening hand is you just multiply all these together, right? So the probability of all these happening, none of entourage, right, not having any copies of entourage in our first hand, is a result of multiplying all of these together, right? So what we do is we look at the probability of drawing then is 1 minus the probability of not drawing. So it's 1 minus 28 times 27 times 26 times 25 times 24 divided by 30 divided by 29 divided by 28 divided by 27 by 26. What we come out to is that you have roughly a 31% chance of drawing a specific card in your opening 5. Okay, but then of course we do get our mulligan, right? Now, for those of you out there who are thinking, well, but those are independent events, you're correct. Each draw of 5 will have a 31% chance of drawing entourage, right? However, the chance of doing it twice and having that happen, it's an A and B, right? So we want to multiply them together. So in this case, once we move on to not drawing it or drawing it with a full mulligan or not drawing it with a full mulligan, you are looking at the probability of drawing it is 1 minus the probability of not drawing times the probability of not drawing. And if we go through the math, ultimately what we find is that we have a 52.4%, so just over a 50% chance of starting with a specific card, at least one copy of that specific card in our starting hand. So why in this case is the backwards method better? What's neat about it is that we don't have to worry about the case where we would draw both of the desired card in our hand, right? So we don't have to worry about the fringe case, although very low. There is a chance that we could get both copies of entourage, and we don't have to account for that by doing it in the backwards method. So this might be especially applicable to the case where, let's back up. Let's say we're going to look at the case where we want to draw an upgrade. And we want to ensure we have an upgrade in our opening hand, but there might be 10 copies of that upgrade in our deck. It is highly likely that at some point you're going to get 2 upgrades in one of those 5 draws, right? So instead of worrying about all of the combinations of having those various 10 upgrades in your hand, instead we just calculate the chance of not having an upgrade, and things, instead of being messy, actually become a lot better, right? So by doing it in this reverse format, we're calculating the chance of not seeing it, and thus by subtracting, we're left with the chance of getting at least 1, and we don't have to worry about the cases of exactly 1. And what this does is it just simplifies our calculations, and it makes it a lot easier for us to wrap our heads around and actually do the math, okay? So let's go ahead and look at the Mace window example, right? So Mace, of course, as we know, he has the power action where you can look at the top 4 cards of your deck and actually pull an upgrade out of that as well. So if you really think about it, for Mace, you have the mulligan for 5, or you have your opening hand for 5, you have your mulligan for 5, and then you have his power action. So really you have a significant probability of actually having access to at least 1 upgrade, right? So in this case, the probability of having it on a draw or the power action, right? The probability of having access to a first turn upgrade if you have 10 upgrades in your deck. Probability of draw or power action equals 1 minus the probability of not drawing it and not getting it on his power action. Okay, so we just, in the last example, calculated the probability of not getting it. We went through the method of doing the calculation of not getting a specific card in your opening hand, right? But if we go ahead and we break this down, right, what we see in this equation here is it's 1 minus, right, because again, we're subtracting. In this case, there are 30 cards in your deck, but there are 20 of them that are not the success. So it's 20 over 30 times 19 over 29 times 18 and so on. And then we square that because it's the chance twice of not getting it in the mulligan as well. Then we also multiply that times 15 times 14 times 13 times 12, which is the additional 4 card, or the probability of not getting it on the additional 4 cards. So what we end up finding on Mace is that there is a 99.8% chance that you have access to at least 1 of your 10 upgrades in your deck. And that's pretty cool. Right, moving on to another example, let's look at the case of Double Down, right? So remember, Double Down allows you to put 3 copies of 2 cards, of up to 2 cards in your deck. So you would do this for, I don't know, again, we can use Entourage, right? There's a lot of people out there who are running the 3 Entourages, not just to put additional scoundrels on the table, but to try to get Entourage early, because then it can tutor the other ones, right? So what is the probability of getting your 3x card, your 3 of card, in your opening hand with full mulligan? So we just go back to the method we used before, right? So the probability of drawing is 1 minus the probability of not drawing it squared. So it's, in this case, it's 27 over 30 times 26 over 29, because again, there's 3 in the deck now, and so on. And what we end up finding is that you have roughly a 68% chance of ending up with one of your 3x's in your hand. All right, so all this is well and good. Looking at the specific examples is neat and all, but again, unless we can actually take this information and do something with it to help us in game, it doesn't really help that much. So what I want to do is I want to take a look at an example here that actually happened on a Dice Commando video. Amy was actually playing this game, and what she was playing was Jin. This was a Trilogies match. She was playing the new Jin and the new Luke. And what I'm showing here is the case that she had in front of her. So she had a modified 2-gun on the table, and she had a Luke blank, a Luke die showing a blank, and a Jin die showing a blank. And the question was, if you had 1 card left in your hand, which is the case that she had in front of her, which dice do you reroll, right? No one's arguing that you should reroll in this case, because you want to try to get something out of those dice that are on the table. But if you only have the one chance, do you pick up the blanks? Obviously, you're going to pick up, right? No doubt there. So really the question is, do you pick up the 2 or not? So I'm curious, I'm asking the question now, right? What do you think you would have done? And go ahead and pause the video if you need time to stop and think about it. All right, so before we get into the answer, let's really sit down and analyze this, right? So you have the 3 damage sides on Luke, the 1 gun, the 2 gun, and the 1 melee. So those are all damage that you want to roll into. And you also have the 2 gun and the 2 gun and the +2 on Jin. But when you really think about it, getting the +2 on Jin doesn't help you because you need to have something to pair with it. Furthermore, getting the melee side on Luke doesn't help you because it can't help to modify that 2 gun. Right? So what it really breaks down to is it better to re-roll the +2 or not? All right, so what we've broken this down to is the two options, of course. So keep the ranged in the pool and re-roll the blanks, or the other option, which is to re-roll all the dice. And what we find is that once you start looking at all of the options, the chance of missing, the probability of missing when you keep the two ranged in the pool is actually higher. Okay, so you have a 33% chance of missing by leaving the two ranged in the pool, whereas if you pick them all up, you decrease that probability to only 22%. However, though, once we start looking at the way that the variance breakdown is, you do have a higher probability altogether of getting a higher damage output by leaving the two. And this makes sense, right? If you're able to get something that pairs with it, you will already have the two to give you higher output, right? So combined, we have a 0.14 and a 0.08. So you have roughly a 0.22% chance of getting a 5 or a 6, whereas you only have a 0.12 probability of getting a 5 or a 6 if you don't reroll, or if you do reroll the 2. However, in that middle range, what we end up finding is that you have a greater consistency by doing the +2 reroll as well. So not only do you decrease your chance of missing, you also have a larger range there in the mid-range, right? So you need to decide as a player, right? There isn't really a right or wrong answer here, and it may depend in game, right? If you're way behind and you need to catch up, then maybe it's worth decreasing your overall consistency to try to get a greater damage output. Or on the flip side, maybe you are ahead and you just want to keep pounding on them and you don't need that extra damage and you just want to ensure that you can put some damage and get something out of it. So it's going to depend on what type of player you are. It's going to depend on where you are in the game. However, being able to look at it, because I know that when I looked at this intuitively, I was like, well, of course you want to leave the 2 on the table because it's already damage, right? However, because it's the modified side and with the way the pairings worked out, it actually turns out once you actually start to think about it and you do the math and you do the breakdown on it, that probably the better choice for just getting damage out is, of course, to re-roll them all, which may be non-intuitive. All right, so that's going to wrap up the Please Tell Me the Odds episode. If you liked this, please leave that feedback, like, and subscribe. And if nothing else, go Commando.